Pay attention to the video footage from the security camera mounted on the porch of a house directly opposite, in a quiet residential area in Boise. The time displayed in the corner of the screen is 8:14 a.m. on October 12, 2024. Morning light spreads evenly across the street as a police patrol car slowly enters the frame, reduces speed, and stops in front of a completely normal-looking two-story house. The house shows no signs of disturbance. The lawn is neatly mowed, a gray sedan remains parked in the driveway, and everything gives the impression that this is just another quiet morning like any other day. But the reason the two officers are there began nearly an hour earlier when St. Luke's Boise Medical Center sent an urgent report about a female cancer patient who had lost contact for 9 consecutive days since October 3, missing mandatory appointments. With her phone completely off and no response to any contact attempts, a situation serious enough to trigger a welfare check due to health risks. The camera records the two officers stepping out of the vehicle, pausing to observe the house overall, their eyes moving from the windows to the entrance and noticing that all the curtains are fully drawn. They approach the front door, knock 3 times, and wait. There is no response. The officer on the left tries to look through the glass but only sees the thick curtain. They knock a second time, harder. Still silence. One officer raises his hand to the radio, reports the situation, and repeats the missing person's medical history, then receives confirmation to proceed with a welfare entry. The other tries the doorknob. It turns. The door is unlocked. Before opening it, they announce loudly in a clear voice, loud enough for anyone inside to hear. No response. The door opens slowly. The air inside is quiet in an unusual way. The living room is tidy, furniture neatly arranged, with no signs of recent activity, which is more notable given that a person undergoing serious medical treatment is supposed to live there. They step inside, moving slowly and checking each space. One looks into the kitchen, the countertop empty, the sink clean, no signs of recent food preparation or use. The other opens the bedroom door. The bed is made, with no signs that anyone had been lying in it recently. Everything looks more arranged than actively used. They continue moving deeper inside, and that is when a detail begins to stand out. A door with a lock installed on the outside. Not a decorative lock, a real lock, new, with shiny metal. They stop, look at each other, and continue. Another door, also locked from the outside. When they reach the end of the hallway, they stand in front of the door leading to the basement. This time there are 2 locks, one deadbolt, one padlock, both installed on the outside, and both understand this is not normal. One officer steps closer. That is when they hear the first sound, very faint, short, unclear in origin. The other tilts his head and listens. The sound repeats, like a weak movement or an effort to make noise from a dry throat. The pace changes immediately. One calls dispatch, requests backup and permission for emergency lock breaking. Approval is granted quickly. They go back to the car, retrieve tools, and return to the door. Metal screeches as the bolt cutters grip the first lock. A dry click sounds as the lock breaks. They open the door. The stairs lead down into complete darkness. No light from below. But there is a smell. A heavy, damp smell mixed with body odor and infection. The kind that makes them pause before proceeding. Flashlights are turned on. The beams sweep across each concrete step as they descend slowly. No one speaks. When they reach the bottom, the lights illuminate another steel door. And once again, the lock is on the outside. One officer approaches, knocks firmly, and calls out. This time, there is a response. Very weak. A wordless sound. A prolonged breath. They do not wait any longer. The second padlock is cut. The door opens slowly, the hinges producing a long creak as the light shines inside. At first, it is only darkness, then shapes. A windowless room, a mattress placed directly on the floor, a few plastic bottles, a metal tray, and in the corner of the room, a body. A young woman curled up, knees pulled tight to her chest. The light touches her. No immediate reaction. One officer moves closer and lowers his voice. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A slight movement appears in her hand, very slow, as if her body no longer has enough strength to react quickly. As the light steadies, her condition becomes clear. She is so thin that her bones show under her skin. Shoulders protruding, arms thin, wrists with faded bruises, skin pale and dry, lips cracked with dried blood at the corners, hair matted into clumps, stuck to her face, clothes dirty, original color unclear. She tries to move but cannot sit up on her own. Her body trembles lightly and unevenly, her reaction not entirely due to cold. One officer kneels closer, keeping a safe distance. "We're here to help." She opens her eyes, looks toward them, but her gaze is unfocused, as if it takes time to register the presence of others. Her mouth opens. She tries to speak. No sound. Only air escaping from her dry throat. The other officer immediately calls for emergency medical assistance. The time is recorded as 8:29 a.m. While waiting, they quickly observe the surroundings. No windows, no other exits, no phone, no signs that she could have left this place on her own. One officer gently asks her name. No response. Asks if she can move. A small movement in her fingers, then it stops. When medical personnel arrive, they bring a stretcher and emergency equipment. They perform a quick check. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, signs of infection, possible unidentified injuries. They begin administering fluids right there. When they lift her onto the stretcher, her body barely resists. She has no ability to hold herself upright. As she is carried up the stairs, daylight hits her, and she reacts slightly by turning her head, as if the light is too strong after a long time in darkness. When the ambulance left the scene and headed toward St. Luke's Boise Medical Center, the woman's condition remained critical. She barely reacted to her surroundings, and throughout the entire journey she was unable to provide any information about her identity, only making very slight movements with her hands and eyelids as medical staff tried to keep her conscious. Upon arrival at the emergency room around 9:12 a.m., the medical team began the process of identifying her through medical records, fingerprints, and recent patient data. And within less than an hour, they confirmed that the woman was Dr. Lauren Hayes, 33 years old, a resident physician who worked primarily at this same medical facility and had been reported missing less than 24 hours earlier. This identification immediately changed the entire severity of the case, because Lauren was not an anonymous or homeless person, but a doctor with a clear record, a work schedule, colleagues, family, and more importantly, a medical history that required close monitoring. Her medical record showed she had been diagnosed with a rare form of sarcoma in August 2022, a condition that demanded ongoing treatment including chemotherapy and regular checkups. However, throughout 2023 and most of 2024, Lauren had continued working, taking shifts, staying in touch with colleagues and family, and showed no signs of isolation or danger until early September 2024, when colleagues began noticing changes. She responded more slowly, frequently canceled appointments at the last minute, and gradually stopped appearing at work. At first, this was attributed to her health condition, but when calls went unanswered and emails received no replies, concern began to build. Her family also confirmed they had not been able to speak directly with Lauren for several weeks, with all information relayed through only one person, her husband, Ethan Caldwell, 40 years old, who worked in residential construction and had become her primary caregiver since she started treatment. According to neighbors, Ethan was a quiet man who rarely interacted much with those around him, stayed home frequently, and appeared to control most activities related to his wife in recent times. They rarely saw Lauren outside, and when they did, she usually appeared weak, moved slowly, and was always accompanied by Ethan. This was initially seen as the behavior of a devoted husband caring for his sick wife, but in the current context, those details began to take on a different meaning, especially since at the time police discovered the victim in the basement. Ethan was not in the house. There were no signs he had left in a panic, and he could not be reached by phone. This immediately made him a person of direct interest, because he lived with the victim, had full access to the house, and was the last known person to have contact with her before she disappeared. The scene at the house in northern Boise was quickly converted to a criminal investigation status after the victim was removed, and by around 9:47 a.m. on October 12, 2024, the area had been completely secured with the presence of the Boise Police Department's Criminal Investigations Unit and the Technical Forensics Team, led by lead investigator Detective Mark Ellison. He requested a full reconstruction of how the space had been used, from the entrance and staircase to the structure of the sealed room below. And after just a few minutes of observation, he realized this was not a temporarily used area, but a deliberately modified environment. The walls were not bare concrete, but had an additional layer of sound-absorbing material, including industrial foam panels fixed behind a thin wooden wall, which significantly reduced any sound coming from inside before it can travel to the upper floors. This explained why no neighbors had reported hearing clear cries for help over many days. The floor was covered with a synthetic plastic layer that was easy to clean and showed signs of regular sanitation, and the ventilation system had been adjusted to maintain stable airflow while minimizing the spread of odors outside. These details together indicated the space had been designed to serve a specific and sustained purpose rather than as an impulsive reaction. The collected locks as evidence showed they were all new industrial-grade locks with serial numbers matching an online purchase transaction confirmed on September 18, 2024, about 2 weeks before the victim completely lost contact. More notably, all the locks had been installed on the outside of the doors, from the basement entrance to the steel door at the end of the hallway, which completely ruled out the possibility that the person inside could open the doors from within, and reinforced the hypothesis that the confinement was carried out by someone who controlled all access points. When the forensics team expanded the examination to the upper floors, they found no signs of forced entry from outside. Data from the neighborhood security system, including cameras from 3 adjacent houses within a 50-meter radius, also recorded no suspicious activity between October 1 and October 12. All footage showed normal comings and goings, which led investigator Ellison to shift his thinking from an intrusion to the possibility that the perpetrator was someone with legal access to the house, a person who did not need to break in, did not need to hide their presence, and could move freely inside without drawing attention. When they returned to the basement, the technical team discovered a small camera device fixed in the high corner of the wall opposite where the victim had been lying. The device was connected to a recorder located in the living room upstairs. Data extracted the same day showed the system had begun operating on September 21, 2024, with video segments recording the victim in the same space at various times, with very little change in position. This indicated she had no freedom of movement and all activity was continuously monitored. Some recordings also showed the lights in the room being turned off completely for many consecutive hours, leading investigators to question the control of the victim's daily cycles, and whether this was a method to weaken her sense of time orientation and psychological state. In addition, the room contained a metal tray with traces of dried food, 3 used plastic water bottles, and a small container for waste, all arranged within a very narrow area sufficient for the victim to survive, but not enough to allow any freedom. Marks on the floor showed she rarely left her main position, and everything in the room appeared arranged to maintain minimal life while maintaining absolute control. When these factors were compared with the victim's physical condition, including severe malnutrition, prolonged dehydration, old and new bruises on her wrists and neck, investigator Ellison concluded this was a calculated, prepared, and sustained process of prolonged confinement. At 11:18 a.m. that same day, the case was officially reclassified as an investigation into organized kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. The findings recorded at the basement scene began to be cross-referenced with external data, and the connection between these information sources revealed a consistent behavioral pattern. Investigator Detective Mark Ellison and his analysis team extracted the complete financial transaction history related to the house address and discovered a series of purchases spanning from September 15 to October 2, 2024, including industrial locks, high-strength nylon ties, soundproofing foam, waterproof floor covering material, and small lighting devices, bought piecemeal through multiple separate orders. Each order contained only individual items, an approach that might make each transaction appear normal on its own, but when combined, they formed an almost complete list for setting up a controlled confinement space. Notably, the delivery times of these orders coincided with the period when the victim began reducing contact with the outside world, creating a direct link between the physical preparation process and the victim's gradual disappearance. In parallel with the financial data, the digital forensics team analyzed the electronic devices seized at the scene, including a laptop and a cell phone found in the living room. The results showed that starting September 12, 2024, a series of searches appeared related to maintaining life under restricted conditions, with phrases such as minimum water intake survival, how to prevent infection without hospital, soundproofing small enclosed space, and how long can a person survive without solid food. These searches did not appear in isolation, but repeated in cycles and increased in frequency in the following days, indicating a continuous research and adjustment process rather than an impulsive act. When the internal camera system data was analyzed more deeply, the team discovered the monitoring device had been running continuously from September 21, 2024, with almost no gaps in recording except for certain fixed hours from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., when the lights in the room were completely turned off. The videos showed the victim always appearing in the same space with limited movements and no signs she was allowed to leave the area. Some segments recorded the victim attempting to move but quickly stopping, as if limited by both physical condition and environment. This showed the control extended beyond physical space to adjusting activity cycles, light, and time, factors that could directly affect the victim's psychological state. Meanwhile, witness interviews conducted on October 13th and 14 with people living in the surrounding area continued to reinforce the hypothesis of prolonged isolation. A neighbor named Karen Mitchell said she had not seen Dr. Lauren Hayes outside since around September 24, and on the rare occasions before that, she usually stood near the door, moved slowly, and quickly went back inside. Other witnesses also confirmed that in the 3 weeks before the incident was discovered, all activities related to the house, from receiving packages and deliveries to taking out trash, were handled by only one person with no appearance by the victim. When these facts were compiled, investigator Ellison began to identify a clearer pattern in which the confinement behavior was implemented in stages. The first stage was social isolation as the victim gradually lost contact with colleagues and family. The next stage was environmental control, as the living space was modified to restrict movement and reduce outside access. And the final stage was maintaining that state over time through control of food, water, and light. Notably, the entire process was disguised under the role of a caregiver, a role that allowed the perpetrator to provide a reasonable explanation for the victim's absence to the community and created a cover that prevented the controlling behavior from being suspected in the early stages. This pattern showed the goal was not immediate death, but maintaining minimal life long enough to prolong the confinement and keep the victim in complete dependence on the controller, a state in which all basic needs from water and food to light were provided under control, creating a closed loop the victim could not break. On October 14, 2024, after compiling all physical evidence, digital data, and witness statements, the investigation team officially determined they were facing a structured criminal pattern in which the kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment had been carried out as a prolonged, planned process that was continuously adjusted over time. As Dr. Lauren Hayes' condition gradually stabilized after nearly 2 days of fluid administration, electrolyte adjustment, and continuous monitoring at St. Luke's Boise Medical Center, doctors confirmed she was able to answer short questions with support, and on the afternoon of October 14, 2024, at 3:22 p.m., the first interview was conducted in a private hospital room with investigator Detective Mark Ellison and a psychological specialist present to ensure the communication process caused no additional harm. Lauren began speaking very slowly, with pauses between sentences, as if each detail had to be pulled from a compressed layer of memory. Going back to early September 2024, when her health declined markedly after a treatment cycle, her husband Ethan Caldwell began suggesting she limit contact with the outside world, initially for reasons of conserving energy and avoiding infection, explanations that fully matched her medical condition. Lauren said at the time she saw nothing unusual, but just a few days later, small changes began appearing and gradually accumulated into a control system. Her phone was no longer within reach but placed in a fixed position. Calls from colleagues were answered on her behalf, and direct conversations with family were gradually replaced by short text messages. By mid-September, she realized she no longer controlled her own daily schedule. Eating, resting, or even opening a window all had to go through Ethan. But because of her weakened physical state, she accepted it as part of the treatment process. Lauren described a moment around September 21, when she was asked to go down to the basement because it was quieter and more suitable for rest. And the moment the door closed behind her, she began to feel a clear change. At first, she could still call him when needed, but later, the door could no longer be opened from inside, and every time Ethan appeared, he locked it again immediately after leaving. In the early days, she still received food and water regularly, but portions quickly decreased from 3 times a day to 2, then 1, and finally only a small tray and 1 bottle of water in about 24 hours. Lauren said the feeling of hunger was not the hardest part, but the prolonged thirst, her throat so dry and burning that every swallow hurt. She had to divide each sip of water to make it last. The lights in the room followed no pattern, sometimes on for many hours, sometimes off completely for periods she could not determine, causing her to lose all sense of time. Lauren said there were times she did not know how long she had slept or been awake, and that gradually disrupted her thinking. Over time, her mobility decreased, from being able to stand and take a few steps in the early days to only sitting, and finally lying down and moving by dragging her body across the floor. Scrapes appeared on her hands and legs and later became infected due to lack of care. She clearly remembered a period around October 5 when she had a high fever, her body hot and shaking, but was not given water for nearly a day. That was when she believed she would not survive the night. She tried to call out, tried to make sounds, but her throat no longer had the strength to produce noise, and the surrounding space seemed to swallow every sound. When asked about trying to escape, Lauren explained the doors were always locked from the outside, and even if there had been an opportunity, she did not have the strength to stand, let alone break a lock or find a way out. Beyond the physical factor, she emphasized that psychological control played a very large role. Ethan repeatedly reminded her that she could not take care of herself and that she would not survive without him. Those words, repeated in an enclosed space with no other sources of information, gradually became something she began to believe. Lauren said there were times she no longer thought about escaping, but only tried to keep herself alive through each day, each hour, each sip of water, each breath. She also described the times Ethan appeared, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just standing and watching. The way he controlled the space more through silence than action, and that very silence made her unable to predict what would happen next, creating a state of constant tension. When the interview ended, Lauren was visibly exhausted, her voice growing weaker and stopping many times. But what she provided clarified an important part of the case structure, not only confirming that the confinement had lasted for many weeks, but also showing how it had been built step by step, from initial isolation to environmental control, and finally maintaining a state of complete dependence in which the victim was not only held physically, but also stripped of the ability to resist, mentally. By the morning of October 15, 2024, investigator Detective Mark Ellison and his team had determined that the only person capable of setting up, operating, and maintaining the entire confinement system was Ethan Caldwell. The victim's 40-year-old husband, who had complete control of the house, was present throughout the period the victim lost contact and was behind the shopping transactions and related electronic activity. Data from Ethan's cell phone, extracted through an emergency warrant, showed that at approximately 7:58 a.m. on October 12, just under 20 minutes before police arrived for the welfare check, his device had left the house area and traveled south on State Highway 55. The GPS signal recorded steady speed with no sudden stops, indicating he had not left in a panic, but with prior planning. Gas station data in the Eagle, Idaho area also recorded the card payment transaction matching the time and location of the device, further confirming the travel route. At 10:26 a.m. that same day, an emergency statewide alert was issued across Idaho with a detailed description of the vehicle, license plate, and identifying features of Ethan. And the information was also shared with federal law enforcement agencies due to the seriousness of the case. Meanwhile, patrol teams on major routes began checking vehicles matching the description. And at approximately 2011 p.m., on October 15, an officer from the Twin Falls Police Department spotted a black pickup truck matching the description moving slowly near the southern outskirts of the city. The license plate was confirmed to match the alert data. Support units were immediately dispatched to set up a safe traffic stop. The vehicle was pulled over on a quiet stretch of road, and when the officer approached, the driver was identified as Ethan Caldwell. He showed no signs of resistance, did not attempt to flee, and complied with the request to step out of the vehicle with both hands behind his back to be handcuffed. During the arrest, Ethan remained remarkably calm. When informed of the arrest warrant related to kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, he only reacted by shaking his head slightly and saying, "You've got this wrong." A statement recorded in the on-scene officer's official report. The subsequent search of his vehicle revealed no weapons but some personal items and work-related documents, with no signs he was preparing to leave the state or flee long-term. This led investigators to question whether he believed his actions would not be discovered. When Ethan was brought to the police station that evening, he continued to insist he had only been caring for his wife, and that all actions were intended to help her recover. However, when his statement was compared with the physical evidence, digital data, and the victim's detailed account, The contradictions became clear, from installing external locks, controlling light, restricting food and water, to continuous camera monitoring. All of it showed a level of control far beyond any concept of ordinary medical care. With the suspect now in custody, the investigation moved into the phase of strengthening the case file in preparation for prosecution, in which the evidence was arranged chronologically, from the first shopping transactions in mid-September to the point when the victim was completely isolated, and finally to the morning of October 12th, when the entire system was discovered and ended. A chain of events that in retrospect clearly show that Ethan Caldwell's arrest was not the result of coincidence, but the inevitable conclusion of an investigation built on the smallest details. The official prosecution was initiated at the end of November 2024 at Ada County Court, where the case file was presented with a clear structure based on the chain of evidence established throughout the investigation. Lead prosecutor Daniel Reeves argued that Ethan Caldwell's behavior was not an impulsive reaction or a mistake in caregiving, but a planned process of confinement prepared from mid-September 2024 and maintained continuously for at least 21 days with the goal of complete control over the victim both physically and mentally. The evidence presented included the purchase history of locking devices and soundproofing materials, search data related to maintaining life under restricted conditions, and internal camera footage showing the victim held in a sealed space with no ability to leave. In addition, medical experts from St. Luke's Boise Medical Center were called to clarify Dr. Lauren Hayes' condition at the time she was found on October 12. They confirmed she was in a state of severe malnutrition, prolonged dehydration, untreated infection, and early signs of multiple organ failure. Critical care specialist Dr. Melissa Grant testified in court that if the victim had not received medical intervention within the next 24 to 48 hours, the likelihood of death was very high. This testimony became one of the key factors in determining the severity of the behavior. The defense attempted to argue that Ethan acted in his role as caregiver and may have made mistaken decisions under pressure, but this argument was quickly dismissed when the prosecution pointed out that installing external locks, restricting food, and controlling light could not be considered reasonable caregiving behavior under any medical standard, especially when the victim was completely deprived of access to outside help. During the trial held from February 10 to February 18, 2025, the jury was presented with the full sequence of events chronologically, from the initial changes in controlling behavior to the establishment of the confinement space, and finally the victim's condition when discovered. On February 20th to 25, the court found Ethan Caldwell guilty of multiple serious charges, including first-degree kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, aggravated assault, and endangering the life of another person. The sentence imposed was 28 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. In his statement before the court, the judge emphasized that the defendant's actions had not only caused physical harm, but had created a prolonged environment of control that could completely destroy a person's will. Dr. Lauren Hayes did not attend the sentencing in person due to her health condition, but a statement read on her behalf described that surviving did not mean the end. She faced a long recovery process, including treatment for complications from malnutrition, restoration of motor function, and psychological support to process what had happened. Experts confirm that the mental impacts, including anxiety disorders and post-traumatic stress responses, could last for many years or even a lifetime. The case closed legally, but its consequences continue to exist, not only for the victim but also for the surrounding community, where prolonged confinement had occurred right inside a normal residential neighborhood, without being detected for many weeks. If you want to see more unreleased case files and detailed analyses like this, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any episodes. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.